สถาบันพระปกเกล้าได้รับพระกรุณาจากพระเจ้าหลานเธอพระองค์เจ้าพัชรกิติยาภามาทรงเป็นประธานในพิธีเปิดการประชุมวิชาการสถาบันพระปกเกล้าในปีนี้ครับ
ค่ะลำดับต่อไปนะคะจะขอเชิญทุกท่านรับชมวิดีทัศน์เรื่องหลักนิติธรรมกับประชาธิปไตยขอเชิญรับชมค่ะ
ครับ
กฎหมายต้องไม่มีชนชั้นฐานะเข้ามาเกี่ยวข้องต้องไม่เลือกปฏิบัติไม่ลำเอียง
ทุกวันนี้ปัญหาคอร์รัปชันยังแก้ไขได้ไม่หมดจนกลายเป็นความเคยชินในสังคมไทยแล้วครับ
สวัสดิการรัฐควรเข้าถึงทุกๆคนคนรายได้น้อยหรือด้อยโอกาสต้องได้รับสวัสดิการอย่างเท่าเทียม
ไม่ว่ายุคสมัยใดมนุษย์ต่างต้องการแสวงหาหลักการปกครองที่ดีที่สุดเพื่อความสงบสันติสุขและความเป็นอยู่ที่ดีของทุกชีวิตหนึ่งในคำตอบที่น่าสนใจคือการยึดหลักนิติธรรมให้เป็นหลักการที่สำคัญในการปกครองคำว่านิติธรรมเป็นแนวความคิดที่พัฒนาขึ้นในประเทศอังกฤษโดยมุ่งให้เกิดการจำกัดอำนาจของผู้ปกครองและเรียกร้องให้ผู้ปกครองต้องเคารพกฎหมายนอกจากนี้หลักนิติธรรมได้นำไปประยุกต์ใช้ในประเทศต่างๆด้วยชื่อที่ต่างกันไปเช่นในภาคพื้นทวีปยุโรปเรียกว่านิติรัฐส่วนสหรัฐอเมริกาเรียกว่านิติกระบวนแต่ไม่ว่าจะมีชื่อเรียกอย่างไรหรือรายละเอียดต่างกันเพียงไรหลักนิติธรรมนิติรัฐและนิติกระบวนก็มีหัวใจเดียวกันคือคุ้มครองสิทธิเสรีภาพของประชาชนจำกัดการใช้อำนาจของรัฐประเทศไทยให้ความสำคัญกับหลักนิติธรรมดังเห็นได้จากการบัญญัติครั้งแรกในรัฐธรรมนูญแห่งราชอาณาจักรไทยพุทธศักราช 2550 ว่าการปฏิบัติหน้าที่ของรัฐสภาคณะรัฐมนตรีศาลรวมทั้งองค์กรตามรัฐธรรมนูญและหน่วยงานของรัฐต้องเป็นไปตามหลักนิติธรรมถึงแม้หลักนิติธรรมจะมีการพูดถึงอย่างกว้างขวางแต่ยังมีความเป็นนามธรรมค่อนข้างมากทำให้ความหมายยังไม่ชัดเจนมากพอส่งผลให้ที่ผ่านมามีการยกหลักนิติธรรมมากล่าวอ้างเพื่อประโยชน์ของตนเองเกิดความขัดแย้งและนำไปสู่วิกฤตการณ์ทางการเมืองที่เกิดขึ้นซ้ำแล้วซ้ำเล่าเกิดการตั้งคำถามที่ว่าแท้จริงแล้วหลักนิติธรรมนั้นคืออะไรและจะต้องนำมาใช้กับสังคมไทยอย่างไรให้เกิดการพัฒนาอย่างเหมาะสมสถาบันพระปกเกล้าได้ตระหนักถึงความสำคัญของหลักนิติธรรมที่เป็นหลักการสำคัญในการพัฒนาการปกครองในระบอบประชาธิปไตยให้มั่นคงและยั่งยืนจึงได้จัดให้มีการประชุมวิชาการสถาบันพระปกเกล้าครั้งที่ 17 หัวข้อหลักนิติธรรมกับประชาธิปไตยเพื่อเป็นเวทีสาธารณะในการแลกเปลี่ยนเรียนรู้ทางวิชาการประสบการณ์ตลอดจนนำเสนอข้อมูลภายใต้ฐานของการศึกษาวิจัยในประเด็นต่างๆที่เกี่ยวข้องกับหลักนิติธรรมดังนี้นิติธรรมในนโยบายสาธารณะกับการสร้างสังคมที่เป็นธรรมความเหลื่อมล้ำทางเศรษฐกิจกับการเข้าถึงบริการสาธารณะที่รัฐจัดให้ยังคงเป็นปัญหาที่ยังแก้ไขไม่ได้จะต้องใช้หลักนิติธรรมอย่างไรเพื่อสร้างความเป็นธรรมในสังคมวัฒนธรรมการเมืองไทยกับการใช้หลักนิติธรรมวัฒนธรรมที่เต็มไปด้วยระบบอุปถัมภ์และการคอร์รัปชันกับแนวทางการพัฒนาหลักนิติธรรมในประเทศไทยเพื่อส่งเสริมคุณค่าของประชาธิปไตยให้ยั่งยืนหลักนิติธรรมขององค์กรที่ใช้อำนาจรัฐการตีความขอบเขตอำนาจและการถ่วงดุลการตรวจสอบถ่วงดุลการใช้อำนาจในขอบเขตที่รัฐธรรมนูญกำหนดและการตีความจะต้องดำเนินไปในทิศทางใดภายใต้หลักนิติธรรม สิทธิมนุษยชนและสิทธิพลเมืองในกระบวนการยุติธรรมเท่าเทียมทั่วถึงเป็นธรรมปัญหาการเข้าถึงกระบวนการยุติธรรมของประชาชนจะมีแนวทางและข้อเสนอแนะในการแก้ไขปัญหาเหล่านี้อย่างไรเพื่อความเท่าเทียมทั่วถึงและเป็นธรรมคดีทุจริตทางการเมืองและหลักนิติธรรมความย้อนแย้งและดุลยภาพที่เหมาะสมแนวทางการพิจารณาคดีทุจริตทางการเมืองเพื่อนำไปสู่ข้อเสนอแนะในการพิจารณาคดีที่มีประสิทธิภาพมีความสมดุลและเป็นไปตามหลักนิติธรรมหลักนิติธรรมเปรียบเสมือนเสาหลักของการปกครองในระบอบประชาธิปไตยถึงเวลาแล้วที่คนไทยทุกคนต้องช่วยกันทำให้เสาหลักแห่งนี้มั่นคงและมาร่วมกันค้นหาแนวทางในการส่งเสริมและขับเคลื่อนประชาธิปไตยให้ยั่งยืนโดยยึดหลักนิติธรรม
ครับทุกท่านก็คงจะได้ประมวลนะครับเหตุการณ์นะครับเกี่ยวกับหัวข้อการประชุมวิชาการในครั้งนี้ของสถาบันพระปกเกล้าผ่านการชมวิดีทัศน์นะครับลำดับต่อไปจะเป็นการแสดงปาฐกถานำเรื่อง Rule of Law and Democracy How Rule of Law Can Strengthen Democracy โดย Professor Andrew James Harding จาก National University of Singapore
ค่ะซึ่งโอกาสนี้นะคะขอกราบเรียนเชิญดร.ชิงชัยหานเจนลักษณ์นะคะประธานกรรมการจัดการประชุมวิชาการสถาบันพระปกเกล้าครั้งที่ 17 ให้เกียรติแนะนำประวัติผู้แสดงปาฐกถานำขอกราบเรียนเชิญค่ะ
สวัสดีครับท่านผู้เข้าร่วมสัมมนาทุกท่านนะครับก็หวังว่าสัมมนาคราวนี้คงจะเป็นประโยชน์กับท่านที่เข้าร่วมประชุมแล้วก็ท่านที่เข้ามาหลักสูตรของสถาบันพระปกเกล้าทั้งหลายนะครับ Well, it gave me really a great pleasure and honor to introduce the keynote speaker this morning. Is Professor Andrew Harding, who is a personal friend of mine, that one thing I can claim, and long-time friend of KPI. Some of you may remember he had participated in our annual Congress, I think 2 or 3 years ago. Now he's come back. Professor Andrew Harding is a leading scholar in the field of Asian legal studies and comparative constitutional law. He commenced his academic career at National University of Singapore in US before moving to SOAS in London, where he's become head of the law school and director of the Center for Southeast Asia Studies. He joined National University of Singapore as director of the Center for Asian Legal Study and director of the Asian Law Institute from the University of Victoria, BC, in British Columbia, Canada, where he was professor of Asia Pacific Legal Relations and director of the Center for Asia Pacific Initiative. Professor Harding has worked extensively on constitutional law in Malaysia and Thailand, and has made extensive contributions to scholarship in comparative law and development. Having published 9 books as author or editor, he is co-founding editor of Hart Publishing book series, Constitutional System of the World, a major resource for constitutional law in context, and has authored the books on Malaysia and Thailand in that series. Ladies and gentlemen, now I have the honor to give you Professor Andrew Hardin.
Thank you, Dr. Jingjai, for that generous introduction. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you and welcome to the 17th KPI Congress. Let me tell you what a huge pleasure it is to be invited by KPI to give a keynote address on this occasion. As Dr. Jingjai says, I have been associated with KPI for quite a long time, and it's always been a huge pleasure. Let me also at this point pay tribute to the work that KPI has done over the last 20 years in researching and supporting political development, the rule of law, good governance, and effective public administration here in Thailand. Where I live in Singapore, KPI stands for Key Performance Indicators, not King Prajadipok's Institute. But I think it's very clear that KPI has turned in very effective key performance indicators over the last 20 years, and I really want to pay tribute to the work they have done. So, can we have the next slide, please? If there is one. Or the next one after that. That's just to tell you what I'm going to be talking about the next few minutes. All right, thank you. Okay, now I've got my own piece of technology to make it work. Excellent, thank you. I always think when you're giving a keynote address, it's rather like the overture to a great opera, that your job is really to outline the main themes, but not to take anything away from the great arias and the great singers who will be appearing and singing over the next day or two. So we have a very large theme indeed to confront in this Congress, the rule of law and democracy. The background for the Congress states that although it's difficult to define this concept, the rule of law, it is possible to make concrete use of it. And that's something that I agree with very much. We can talk, and we will be talking a great deal about how to define the rule of law. I don't think we should, however, be too troubled by the lack of complete clarity in what the term the rule of law means. Like most abstract terms, it has a core meaning, and I will try to set out what I think that core meaning is, but also has a penumbra or shadow of possible meanings and implications. Terms, of course, even change their meaning substantially over a period of time. The rule of law is no exception in this regard. For example, it is now widely accepted that the so-called thin rule of law, in the sense of legal certainty and due process, is inadequate for our present purposes, and we need to include human rights within its meaning. Justice Tom Bingham has set out this argument very convincingly in his little book, The Rule of Law, which I recommend to you if you're interested in a theoretical and comparative exploration of this topic. So we can use the rule of law as a tool because its core meaning is pretty obvious. More importantly than that, its core value, I think, is also very obvious, even though it's also true that the rule of law has many implications which might be seen by some people as part of the meaning of the term. So I think these implications are the source of the idea that the rule of law has no clear meaning. As to its value, just consider what a society would be like that didn't have the rule of law at all. I don't think that anyone would really prefer to live in a society based on the rule of anything other than law, because otherwise you would be living in a society where power was being exercised without in any way being constrained by law. I think history has provided us with conclusive evidence as to why this is not a good thing. It works. So the core meaning, to my mind, of the rule of law is that regular law is supreme. And in a way, all the other propositions about the rule of law can be derived from this very simple idea. So we can say that no power is above the law. Officials and citizens alike are equally accountable before it. The law alone provides a basis for the exercise of all state power, with no exceptions. Law is regular, in other words, it is settled and is not invented on an ad hoc basis, and not changed according to the person to whom it is applied. Law is not to be retrospective. Any changes in the law must be prospective in nature. Law should be clear and not vague, and its content should therefore be available to everybody. Nobody should be penalized except for a clear breach of settled law. Law is enforced through the ordinary courts. Those courts are independent of political power. And the people, the citizens, should have equal access to those courts. Now that's a long list. We could go on, and I've no doubt we will add many other items to that list. I will add one or two more myself in a moment. Now, most of what I have just said was set out by the English jurist Dicey in the 19th century. Although this is, you might say, a common law type of definition in its original concept, nonetheless, it has proved to be durable in many societies across the world. One thing to note about this definition is that Dicey originally precluded the idea of the development of a separate system of administrative laws designed to control administrative action. According to Dicey, administrative discretion should be confined very narrowly, and he objected to administrative law as providing special laws for officials, which he thought was objectionable. However, later in his life, he saw that it was necessary to control the exercise of official power by special means. Officials, after all, exercise statutory powers and therefore have powers going beyond those of private citizens. One could, of course, add to Dicey's principles that law must be made via proper law-making processes, and these days that would normally be regarded as including opportunities for public participation and political debate. Hence, immediately, there is an important connection between the rule of law and democracy. Now, Dicey's definition was criticized as giving rise to a problem. Does the rule of law in this definition allow laws to be passed that may be unacceptable in a democratic society? For example, discriminatory laws that were passed and implemented in Nazi Germany. This is sometimes used as an example of the defect in the idea of the rule of law, because it does not address the substance of laws, but only the procedures and the due process involved in implementing them. Now, I have to say that that is not an argument that appeals to me, because if you look at the actual history of Hitler's Germany, I think that they actually breached every single principle that I've set out just now. So it's not an example of a rule of law based society that had unacceptable laws. But I think at the same time we also accept these days that fundamental human rights have to be regarded as part of what we mean by the rule of law. More often in practice, what we see is not a rule of law society enacting inappropriate laws, but rather we see states whose adherence to the rule of law is in essence theoretical rather than practical, or where the rule of law is seen simply as an option which is not necessarily binding on the state, or else we see states where there are institutions designed to carry the rule of law into effect, but they do not work very well in practice. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, to promote and achieve the rule of law, we have a great deal of work to do across the world. So there's the classical thin model of the rule of law according to Dicey. But some people think the rule of law should be thick rather than thin, and this is what I want to explain. So should the rule of law be like the gymnast or the sumo wrestler? Should it be lean and agile and muscular, or should it be big enough to knock anything out of the ring? That's the question that people try to confront, talking about thick and thin rule of law. Now, the critique of Dicey leads to a problem. If we adopt a thin notion of due process rule of law, we may open the door to bad laws, provided they are applied through the proper process. However, if we adopt a thick conception of the rule of law, it may become unwieldy and subjective, or as one person has put it, a meaningless slogan devoid of any determinative content. For example, does the rule of law imply and include a particular type of political economy? Does it include international human rights, or substantial fairness, or social justice? These are good questions. But essentially, we should not be expecting that the rule of law can solve every problem that we have. Sometimes people talk as though that is possible. The rule of law is a panacea for every difficulty. But that, I think, is expecting much too much of the rule of law. And so we are left with the question, which exactly of our problems is the rule of law designed to deal with? This question is not asked maybe as often as it should be asked. If you look at the websites of any international organizations promoting the rule of law, they tend to just assume that the rule of law is a good thing and give you a sketchy definition of what it might mean. But unfortunately, they don't tell you how to achieve the rule of law, and that is really the most important question. And I'm sure that that is something that we will be discussing in great detail over the next 2 days, looking at the panels that have been organized. It seems like a very practical and very focused discussion, and I think that's exactly how we should proceed with it. So what is the relationship between the rule of law and democracy? And I want to bring in here also the concept of development, yet another contested concept. The rule of law has been set out by some people as an important means for achieving economic development. It has also been criticized as a bastion of privilege and an obstacle to development in the broader sense of the term. In the practical development context these days, more attention is given to matters that are not addressed or even contradicted by Dicey's definition, such as, for example, constitution building, persistent extra-legal actions of the state, the democratic processes of legitimate parliamentary lawmaking, the system of judicial review of administrative actions, the setting up of special courts and special enforcement agencies, public participation in decisions, and infrastructural problems such as capacity building, security, corruption, legal education, judicial independence, the separation of powers and functions, and the dangers of elite capture of some of these things. Through this connection of the rule of law and development, the rule of law itself has become not just a concept, but an industry right across the world. And this is, I think, the reason for the extensive penumbra or shadow of meaning that the rule of law has for many people. The rule of law means one thing to a legal scholar, constraint of power, another to a policeman, rigorous law enforcement, yet another to an activist, access to justice, and yet another to an economist, good governance and sound institutions. But in essence, I think they are contemplating the same thing. So is the rule of law then a democratic concept? Thomas Carruthers defined the rule of law in the development context as a system in which the laws are public knowledge, are clear in meaning, and apply equally to everyone. They enshrine and uphold the political and civil liberties that have gained status as universal human rights over the last half-century. In particular, anyone accused of a crime has the right to a fair, prompt hearing and is presumed innocent until proved guilty. The relationship between the rule of law and democracy, he says, is profound. I agree with that, but it poses the question whether you can have the rule of law without democracy or democracy without the rule of law. Does the one imply the existence of the other? Unfortunately, democracy too is one of those concepts with a penumbra of meaning. There is hardly a state on earth which does not proclaim to be a democracy in some sense of the word. Given that there are many ways of defining democracy, we should, I think, accept that there is no such thing as a perfect democracy. There is no single model that we should aspire to. So it's in the nature of democracy that it doesn't function as a system of government in the same way that some other systems might be said to function. Churchill famously said that democracy was the worst form of government with the exception of all the others that have ever been tried from time to time. There's a lot of truth in that. Let me give you my own rough definition of democracy, and it has to be a very rough one, given that democracy exists in many different forms across the world. My definition depends on having parliamentary representation via an electoral system. As you know, because this is being extensively debated in this country at the present time, there are many views about what constitutes an ideal electoral system, even for a given country, let alone in general. So I suggest that there is no perfect electoral system. There is simply the system that fits the circumstances and the type of democracy that people intend to create. So these systems are very debatable as to their respective merits and are also capable of being undermined by corruption and other malpractices. So a democracy is a system in which both the government and the opposition, to my mind, have to compete seriously for votes in a broad franchise, and voting determines who forms the government. This is not as broad a definition as it might seem at first sight, although it is purposely designed to include what you might think of as imperfect democracies. I assume that there is no such thing as a perfect democracy. But let's just reflect on this. Before 1928, the United Kingdom itself did not have votes for women on the same basis as men. There was no equality in voting until 1928. which is still a lot less than 100 years ago. And as you know, Thailand was the first country in Asia to adopt democracy with universal voting in its first constitution in 1932, only 4 years after final equality between men and women was achieved in Britain, which is supposed to be a cradle of democracy. In the 19th century, only male property owners were generally allowed to vote. So on my criterion, no country was actually a democracy until sometime in the late 19th century. Now, criticism of my definition might be that it includes spurious systems in which voting is gerrymandered or where for other reasons there is no level electoral playing field. But if you are looking for a perfect fairness in the electoral system, I think you will simply not be able to find it. We simply do the best we can to ensure fairness in our electoral systems. Even in the United States, for example, there is unequal funding between the main parties when it comes to election campaigns, and voters do not get to elect their president directly, but only through an electoral college. We can, of course, also debate how democratic a given society should be. There are many critiques of democracy that we have to respond to. For example, that democracy does not secure intergenerational justice. Are we in danger of making democratic decisions which actually disadvantage our children and our grandchildren in future? Think of the environment and the condition of our planet as one example of this problem. Now, the rule of law can, of course, exist without a developed, or even, I would suggest, any democratic system. Britain, before the Great Reform Act of 1832, although still not genuinely democratic according to my criteria, was a rule of law state and had been such since the early 18th century. A more contemporary example is Hong Kong, which has been a rule of law state since the middle of the 19th century, but still does not have a proper democracy, much as many people in Hong Kong would like it to have a proper democracy. So the question then is whether a democracy can exist without the rule of law. And I would suggest that the answer is no. In order to have the most rudimentary democracy, there have to be electoral laws which are implemented carefully, universally, and rigorously, with malpractices kept to a minimal level. If not, there is no genuine parliamentary representation. That is my definition of democracy. Democracy also depends on the existence of the civil liberties of freedom of expression, assembly, and association. Otherwise, voters cannot be informed, and there is no genuine debate about the issues which determine their choice of candidates. Similarly, if there's no recourse to law, then these rights cannot be enforced in practice. Recourse to law involves settled constitutional laws and an independent judiciary. Once voters exercise their choice and officials are in office, there has also to be accountability. Here it is possible to have political accountability without a strict rule of law. However, I would suggest that this is not advisable. Experience shows that the two go together. If you don't have accountability before the law, it's very unlikely you will have political accountability. Not every decision can be tested via political process, and democratic societies have seen the need to have administrative law to check the most arbitrary and unfair decisions. As I hope you will now see, all of the principles I associated earlier with the rule of law are more or less necessary in order to have even a rudimentary democracy. Beyond this, if you do not have a sense of equal citizenship and a sense that all citizens have recourse to law, it is hard to see that democracy would have any real meaning in practice. So I think it's hardly surprising then that democracy and constitutionalism go together and require the rule of law in order to be effective. A more interesting question then is how to actually get the rule of law. And that is something on which I think we all hope to be enlightened over the next couple of days. It's not easy. How you get the rule of law is a particularly pertinent question in Asia, I think, which has ancient civilizations, deep cultural understanding, religious and ethnic pluralism, and dynamic economic and political development. Many Asian legal traditions tend to emphasize communitarian approaches and the need for good rulers rather than the supremacy of good laws. Nation building, stability, and economic growth have been achieved in general either without assistance from the rule of law or else via rule by law, in which the rule of law is not seen as binding the rulers but only the ruled. China is a current good example of rule by law as opposed to rule of law. The dominance of market forces and liberal democratic versions of the rule of law have challenged this position, posing the problem whether an Asian thick version of the rule of law, incorporating substantive ideology, is more suitable for Asian conditions and thinking than the thin, traditional, and formalistic Dacian conception of the rule of law. Thus, one scholar offers additional rule of law components by way of thickening the rule of law, such as rules for determining which entities can make law and how, publicity, predictability, and accessibility of law, clarity, consistency, stability, and general acceptability of law, narrowing of the gap between the law in books and the law in practice. That is a very familiar problem in so many countries, and the development of legal aid. And I would suggest to add to that the development of legal education, both professional and public. I know that KPI does a very good job in this respect. However, a fundamental problem in Asia is that the law that rules in rule of law thinking is mainly law that was transplanted from Europe in the 19th or 20th centuries. Every single Asian country has a common law system or one based on the civil law. Their constitutions are more varied, with several different models in evidence, all of which are not indigenous to Asia in their origins. Perhaps Brunei is an exception to what I just said, I'm not sure. England, on the other hand, developed its laws out of common elements in its various regional customs and has had 900 years of the common law system. Since we are in 2015, I should also mention that it has had 800 years since the Magna Carta. And I'm very delighted that one of the original copies of the Magna Carta is being displayed currently in Singapore. So I will have pleasure in going back there and viewing one of the 4 original copies, which comes from Hereford Cathedral. England also had more than 300 years since civil war and major constitutional realignments to adjust, adapt, and modernize its democratic institutions, a task which never stops. The nature of British democracy is as much under debate as it has been at any time during the last 800 years. Asian countries, on the other hand, have had less than 130 years, in Thailand around 100 years, in which to absorb foreign-imposed or radically transplanted law, and even less time to develop democracy. These decades have seen, moreover, immense changes of every kind, social, economic, and political, across the whole of Asia. The Asian response to this has been to superimpose on this basic structure of foreign-derived law and political structures a developmental state. A developmental state takes different forms if we compare, for example, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. If we include the Communist Party states of China and Vietnam, the differences are even more obvious. What this has meant, albeit within different political structures, is that the state has been obliged to render itself more and more powerful in order to achieve the rapid industrial development it needed to catch up with the West, avoid colonization or its effects, and sometimes to build or rebuild its societies. Western rule of law thinking sometimes omits to consider the fact that in order to constrain the power of the state, you need to have a powerful state in the first place, and that has been a challenge in many countries. In the process, these states have tended to marginalize the rule of law and democracy. However, having built these strong states, development itself has dictated that Asian states dismantle the powerful developmental state and move towards more democracy, more accountability, and the rule of law. And this is something that has been happening right across Asia since the 1980s, so it's nothing new. In the context of development, we therefore find a similar conundrum to that regarding democracy and the rule of law. Is the rule of law necessary to create development? Again, we need to define what we mean by development. Economists are convinced that rule of law is necessary because only rule of law can provide the entrenchment of property rights, security of transactions, and the guarantee of good governance in the interests of economic development. Others may see development as a broader concept, including all aspects of improvement of the human condition. Now here it seems to me there is no obvious or prescribed sequence of events. No society in history seems to me to have perfected the rule of law and achieved development as a consequence. There is evidence that some have developed the rule of law and democracy in rudimentary forms and then developed as a consequence. Many have developed, at least economically, before adopting the rule of law. Some, on the other hand, have developed the rule of law, economic development, and democracy almost simultaneously. It is, of course, endlessly debated what is the relationship between these three elements. So, by way of a conclusion, let me be clear about what I'm saying in this keynote address. I believe that the rule of law in the thin procedural sense does promote economic development. Economic development in turn promotes democracy and the perfecting of a thick, comprehensive rule of law. A thick, comprehensive rule of law promotes development in its broader sense, including human rights, and encourages a better form of democracy. Accordingly, the rule of law, development, and democracy can form a positively effective, virtuous circle if the conditions are right for that to occur. Now, if only it were easy to achieve this virtuous circle. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it isn't very easy to achieve that. Even to move in the general direction of this virtuous circle, basic political stability is required, not to mention the absence of extreme disasters such as wars and famines. Development of everything is needed at some level before development of anything can be sustained. Here is the complexity of it. Law, education, agriculture, infrastructure, basic health care. The list of things that we have to work on just goes on and on. There is too much of it. And we have to work on all of these things at the same time. There is no obvious sequence of events that working on one thing, succeeding in one thing, leads to success in another thing. Now, as a legal scholar, much as I appreciate the economist's perspective on the rule of law, it does seem to me in the final analysis that the rule of law is a good thing, quite irrespective of its economic benefits. We want the rule of law because we believe that that way alone can we achieve a just society. A just society should be democratic and should believe in development in its broadest sense for the benefit of all of its citizens. The rule of law is an extremely complex and fragile thing in practice. It is elusive in many ways, as we can see, but it is also an immensely useful tool in so many respects. And I think that is one of the assumptions that we have as we commence this Congress. The rule of law is very hard to achieve, and it involves high maintenance to keep it. But we should never forget, ladies and gentlemen, that its purpose is nothing less than the achievement of justice. And the achievement of justice is also an objective of democracy itself. So on this note, I want to wish you all a great Congress and a very fruitful discussion over the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
ค่ะที่จบลงไปนั้นนะคะ Professor Andrew James Harding นะคะจาก National University of Singapore ได้แสดงปาฐกถานำในหัวข้อ Rule of Law and Democracy How Rule of Law Can Strengthen Democracy นะคะขอเสียงปรบมือเพื่อเป็นการให้เกียรติท่านอีกครั้งหนึ่งค่ะ